Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Marissa, and today I guess you could say we are celebrating Christmas in July because I am recreating one of the American Girl holiday dresses, and specifically Emily Bennett's purple dress. Now, while I like this dress, I am not making it for myself, so instead I am recreating it for one of my nieces who, while she probably will not get anything about what this is referencing, will love it just because it's purple. For this dress, I decided to use the Vintage Little Lady Maria pattern as a base, and I specifically decided this because of the sleeves, which I will talk about in a minute. So the first thing I did was make a copy of the pattern. I just did that onto wrapping paper. And then I had to adjust the neckline because the Maria pattern has a round neck, but Emily's dress has more of a square neck. So to do this, I just took a ruler and lined it up with the lowest point of the neckline and drew a straight line across, and then lined it up with the widest point of the neckline and drew a straight line down, and then cut along where those two lines intersected. And the back bodice pattern I just left alone because it was pretty much standard. At least that's how I find most back necklines work, regardless of what shape it is in the front. And while I had these very basic shaped pattern pieces, I went ahead and used them to cut out the lining pieces, which I cut out of some purple cotton voile that I had left over from another project. And then it was time to go about doing the rest of the shaping for the outer bodice pieces. So the first bit of adjustment that I needed to do was because Emily's dress has sort of like almost a waistband around the bottom of the bodice. On the dress, it's actually like the purple, the same dark purple, and then it's just got like a ribbon bow over it. And I decided for simplicity that I was just going to do the entire band as the lighter purple and straight across instead of curved like the original dress has. Just again, for simplicity, I didn't want to make this too complicated of a project. So to do this, I took the front bodice piece and measured from the waist up 2.5 inches and drew a line straight across and just cut along that line. This separates my pattern pieces, and I added seam allowance to the waist piece. The top piece needed a few more adjustments before I could do that, however. So you can see here on Emily's dress, it has gathers at the bottom into the waistband, but the top doesn't have any gathers. It's completely straight. So that means that I need to find a way to add fullness to the bottom of this without changing the neckline. And I have 3 different methods that I've thought of to possibly add the fullness, and I'm just going to experiment with them in a smaller size to decide which one I like best, because all of them kind of make sense, but also there's some reason or other that I think they may not work. So the first thing I'm going to try is just taking this line here and instead of leaving it there, just swinging it out. See, so that adds the fullness right there without messing with the neckline. My concern with this is just that it's adding all of the fullness to the side, and I'm worried that the gathers won't be able to be pushed into the center where they're supposed to be. My second idea is the slash and spread method, and doing it just right along the neckline because that is where the gathers are in the first place. And cut up, leaving a little hinge so that I can spread it out. My concern with this idea is that it kind of distorts the neckline a little, because as you do this, and this is going to be cut on the fold, I can't go too far that way because it's going to eventually hit my fold line. So like, not that I need that much gathering, but it is distorting the shape up here the more I spread it. Okay, last idea is the one that I think is most likely to work, which is just to slash and spread again, but this time going up into this corner right at the edge of the shoulder. The idea being that if I do it this way, the only thing that's really getting distorted is the shoulder line, in that it's, you know, straightening out instead of being at an angle. So like right now it's at an angle, and as I do this, it just flattens it a little. So to me, this method is probably makes the most sense and seems the most likely to work. Okay, so I have them all cut out and gathered up to the same width. And looking at, this is the original pattern piece. And looking at them, this one here, which was the one that was tapered out to the sides, because of how you gather it and everything, it really changes the shape of the side of it, I think, anyway. So I'm not inclined to do this one. I kind of wasn't inclined to do it anyway. Then that leaves these two. To me, they have a very similar look. This is the one that was slashed and spread at the shoulder, and this is the one that was done on the neckline. I don't see a ton of difference. I think I'm leaning towards just doing this one though, the one that was actually done on the neckline, because to me it seems to work as long as I don't like spread it too far over, which is fine because it doesn't need like a ton of added gathering, but it is obvious that it like pulls it back out into the proper shape. So I think this one will work. So having decided how I wanted to add that fullness into the waist, I set about just doing the same thing that I already had experimented with, but on a much larger scale. Now this was one area where transferring my pattern onto wrapping paper was helpful, because the back of the wrapping paper has a 1-inch grid. So I was able to just cut straight along those 1-inch grid lines and spread it out about 1 inch in between each segment, putting paper underneath and taping it down. This basically allowed me to double the width at the waist without really messing with the neckline. And of course, after creating that new shape, I then put some more paper under it and added the seam allowance to it. So that was the front bodice. The back bodice was very similar to the front on the first half, which was just measuring 2.5 inches up from the waist, drawing a line, cutting it apart, and adding seam allowance to both pieces. With the bodice pattern completely adjusted, it was time to start cutting out my pieces. So the main part of this dress is just a dark purple satin, and then all the accents were done from some leftover light purple sheer voile that I had from another project, and I just flatlined it to matching broadcloth on any of the pieces that needed it, which was most of it except for like the ruffle. Now, neither of these fabrics actually matched the original dress, but like I said, I already had the one, and the other one pairs with it very nicely, and I kind of prefer the combination that I ended up with over the original dress anyway. So as usual, I'll be talking about the assembly of this dress in sections, starting with the bodice. So for the bodice, I took the front bodice piece and ran gathering stitches along the bottom, gathered it, and stitched it to the front waistband piece. I also attached the back waistband pieces to the back bodice pieces. Then I stitched the front and back bodice pieces together at the shoulders, doing the same with the lining bodice pieces as well. Now it's time for the neckline ruffle. So I had cut this piece the same width as the ruffle for the sleeves, but you know, a lot longer. I then folded it in half and pressed it, and ran a gathering stitch along that long edge. So I gathered this and pinned it to the main bodice neckline, trying to even out the gathers as much as possible before basting them in place. Then I placed the lining fabric right sides together with the main bodice fabric and stitched all the way around the neckline. Clipped the corners and flipped it so that the wrong sides were together. I then stitched all of the side seams of both the main bodice and the lining bodice. I basted the lining and the main bodice together at both the armholes and the waist. Now it's time for the sleeves, which are the entire reason that I picked the Vintage Little Lady Maria pattern, and that is because this pattern has the puff sleeves with like a cuff and then just this tiny ruffle on the other side of the cuff, which really reminded me of Emily's dress, which has puff sleeves and then a light purple ruffle and, of course, because it's for a doll, elastic. The first thing I did when assembling the sleeves was run a gathering stitch along the top and bottom of the sleeves, as well as along the long edge of the sleeve ruffle. And then I gathered the ruffle to the width of the cuff and basted it into place. Now the cuff is lined, so I have a second cuff piece that I then placed right sides together with the last one, with the ruffle sandwiched in between and stitched along that edge. Then I gathered the bottom of the sleeve to the width of the cuff and stitched it only to one piece. Then flipped the lining of the cuff over, folded under the raw edge, and stitched it down. And then I stitched the underarm seam of both sleeves and then gathered the top edge into the arm side and stitched it down, or stitched those together. So Emily's dress also has this decorative circular something, bow or something, right up in the corner of the neckline of her dress. I made that by just taking a circle of the sheer wall and gathering the edges up so that they pull into the center, which makes a circle with like no raw edges except in the middle, which I then covered up with a button and stitched it up in the corner of the bodice neckline. And the skirt was just a basic rectangle skirt, which is really nice because sometimes the really complicated skirts are a lot of work. So I just determined the length that was needed with seam allowance and hem, and the width actually happened to be the full width of my fabric, so I just cut a nice 2 straight cuts and gathered it up, evened out the gathers onto the bottom of the bodice and stitched it into place before serging it. And then I added the zipper to the back, sewed down the back skirt seam, folded up the hem twice, and stitched it into place. The last piece of embellishment for this dress is the bow, and I did this by cutting out strips of the purple broadcloth and flatlining it to the sheer wall. Then they are sewn right sides together, flipped out into all of these different size rectangles that then are assembled to make a fake bow. This is the same method that is done a lot of times for hair bows, and really I find it very difficult to describe, so that's as detailed as I'm going to go with it. Once it was assembled, I just stitched it to the dress at the waist. And it's done. Here it is next to the doll dress. It obviously did not turn out to be an exact recreation, which was my original plan, but I am still thrilled with how it turned out, and of course I love all of the purple.